It's pretty wild when you think about it. The Bible is one of the most important books in history, but have you ever stopped to wonder if the version you're reading tells the same story as another one? Well, today we're going to dive into just that. How one single verse can mean something completely different depending on the translation. So let's just jump right in with a kind of weird question. Let's say you're building a sacred tent and you need a cover for it. Are you going to use badger skins? Maybe goat skins? Or how about dolphin skins? Yeah, you heard me right. Dolphins. This strange little choice is actually the perfect starting point for our whole investigation. So just how different are we talking here? This isn't about tiny little word changes or a slightly different tone. We are about to see side by side how the entire point of a sentence can get completely flipped on its head. All right, let's get right to the evidence. For our first exhibit, we're going straight back to that mystery about the animal skins. What exactly was covering that tent? Okay, we'll start with a classic, the King James Version, or the KJV. Here in Exodus, it seems pretty clear. It says the covering was made of badger skins. Simple enough, right? Well, what happens when we look at some other versions? Whoa, okay, just look at this. The KJV says badgers, the ESV says goat skins, then the NIV just kind of generalizes and says durable leather, but then the AMP version throws a total curveball and says dolphin or porpoise skins. So for the exact same object, we have 4 totally different materials. Okay, exhibit number 2. This one's from Genesis. The King James Version describes an angry act like this. In their self-will, they digged down a wall. Seems straightforward, right? They got mad, they tore down a wall. But is that really what happened? This is a huge one. The KJV says they destroyed a wall. But if you look at the ESV, the NIV, and the AMP, they all say they hamstrung oxen. So the action goes from destroying property to crippling an animal. The whole meaning, the whole moral weight of the verse completely changes. And believe me, it doesn't stop there. Let's head over to the book of Proverbs, where we'll see an ancient chemical reaction get a very modern and very different makeover. So in the KJV, we get this really specific analogy. It says singing sad songs to someone with a heavy heart is like pouring vinegar on nitrate. Now, nitrate is a mineral salt, kind of like potassium nitrate. If you poured vinegar on it, you'd get a big fizzing chemical reaction. But then you look at the other versions, and it just goes in totally different directions. The NIV makes it about pain, comparing it to pouring vinegar on a wound. Ouch. Then the AMP and the ESV translate nature as soda, like baking soda. So we go from a mineral to an injury to a household chemical for the exact same word. Okay, one more example from Proverbs, and this one really shifts the focus. The KJV says that God rewardeth the fool and rewardeth transgressors. Now, that's led to all sorts of deep theological discussions about grace and judgment. And here, the modern versions don't just tweak the meaning. They change who is even doing the action. It's not about God rewarding anyone anymore. Instead, the ESV, NIV, and AMP all say it's about a person who hires a fool or a drunkard being as reckless as an archer shooting randomly. The focus completely shifts from a divine act to a human mistake. So we've seen it with our own eyes. Skins turn into leather, walls turn into oxen, minerals turn into soda. The big flashing question has to be, why? How does this even happen? This is really the heart of it, right? Is it just a translator picking a slightly different English word? Or is there something much deeper going on before the words even get translated? Well, the answer, turns out, goes way deeper than just word choice. The real reason for all these changes comes from the source documents themselves, the ancient, handwritten manuscripts that each translation is based on. And just so we're all on the same page, a manuscript is just a document that was written by hand, before printing presses. Different translators were working from different families of these ancient texts, and those texts sometimes had centuries of tiny little differences between them, all from being copied over and over by hand. So what's the big takeaway here? It all shows that the choice of which ancient manuscript to use and how to translate just a single word can have a massive ripple effect that changes the meaning of everything around it. I mean, look at this last example from Revelation. It's powerful. The KJV says, "And I stood," which puts the narrator, John, right there on the scene. But the NIV says, "The dragon stood." Wait, what? The entire subject of the sentence changes. Who's standing there, the prophet or the beast? That's a huge difference. Just think back to that wall versus the oxen. Is the crime about destroying property, or is it about cruelty to an animal? One word choice completely changes the moral picture. Or what about the vinegar? Is the saying a quirky chemistry lesson, or is it about deliberately causing someone pain? The entire feeling of that proverb depends on that one single word. At the end of the day, it really all boils down to something that's simple but also kind of profound. The words we read are the building blocks of the meaning we find. You change the word, you change the story. And that leaves us with one final and I think really important question. If the meaning of a text can literally hinge on a single word choice made centuries ago from a handwritten document, how does that change the way we read? Not just this book, but any text that comes to us through the complicated journey of translation.